You told them clearly, directly, this is where my limit is, and they push past it anyway, not once, again. And the part that is hardest to explain is not the frustration. It is the confusion underneath the frustration, because you cannot quite figure out whether they are doing it on purpose, whether they simply do not care, whether something about you specifically invites this kind of behavior. And the answer to all of those questions is more complicated than it looks, because most of the time, when someone repeatedly crosses your boundaries, they are not doing it to harm you. They are doing something far more unconscious than that. They are running a test they were never taught to name, a test they do not know they are running. And understanding what that test is and what it is actually looking for either changes the way you see the behavior entirely. Let us start with what a boundary actually is at the neurological level. When you set a boundary, you are not just communicating a preference. You are sending a signal about how you regard yourself. You are saying, in the most fundamental sense, that your needs, your limits, your sense of self have value, and that signal is received, even when it is not consciously registered. The brain of the person you are communicating with is running its own assessment, and for some people, that assessment includes a question they are not aware of asking. Will this hold? Not as a deliberate challenge, not as a power move, but as a deep, automatic inquiry rooted in early experience. Because for many people who consistently push limits, the question of whether a boundary will hold is not about the boundary itself. It is about the relationship. It is about whether the person in front of them is real, whether their presence is genuine, whether this connection can survive the weight of an actual human being who has needs and limits and things they will not accept. Psychologists who study attachment patterns have found something consistent in people who struggle to honor the limits of others. Many of them grew up in environments where relationships were unstable, where love was inconsistent, where the people they most needed to rely on were sometimes present and sometimes not. And in those environments, the developing nervous system learns something that it carries forward into every relationship that follows. Trust must be earned through proof, not through words, not through stated intentions, through behavior under pressure. A boundary is pressure, and pushing against it is a way of testing whether the person behind it will stay, whether they will enforce it, whether they are who they say they are. This is why boundary testing tends to escalate when it is met with inconsistency. When a limit is stated and then not held, the nervous system of the person testing it does not conclude that the boundary was not real. It concludes that neither was the relationship, and so it tests again, with more pressure, looking for something solid, looking for evidence that the person on the other side of the limit is actually there. This sounds counterintuitive, but it is one of the more consistent findings in the psychology of relationship behavior. When people who experienced abandonment, rejection, or emotional inconsistency early in life often develop a pattern of pushing against limits precisely because they need to know the limits will hold, not because they want to win, because they need to know they will not be left when things get difficult. And a boundary that holds under pressure is one of the clearest signals the nervous system can receive that the relationship is safe, that the person is real, that they will still be there after conflict. There is a second category of boundary testing that works differently, and it is worth separating from the first. Some people test limits not from a place of attachment anxiety, but from a place of learned entitlement. This develops in environments where limits were not modeled, where the child's wants were consistently placed above the needs of others, where boundaries were treated as obstacles rather than as reasonable expressions of self-respect. In these cases, the person does not push limits because they are afraid of being left. They push them because they were never taught that other people's limits are real, that another person's no is not an opening for negotiation, that having a need does not give you the right to override someone else's. This is a different psychology entirely, but the response it requires from you is the same: a limit that is stated and then consistently held, not as punishment, not as hostility, but as the clearest possible communication of what is true about you. Here is something important about how limits work in practice. The research on boundary effectiveness shows something that most people find uncomfortable. The pain point is not in setting the limit, it is in holding it. Because holding it usually requires tolerating the discomfort of the other person's reaction. The disappointment, the anger, the withdrawal, the claim that you are being unreasonable. And for many people, especially those with people-pleasing patterns, that discomfort is precisely where the limit begins to soften. The guilt arrives, the fear of rupture arrives, the familiar narrative that maybe the limit was too strict, that maybe you are asking for too much, that maybe the relationship is more important than the boundary. And the limit gives, and the person testing it receives the signal they were looking for, not the signal you intended to send, but the one the behavior communicated anyway. This limit is not real. Neither, perhaps, is the relationship behind it. Here is the turning point. A held limit is not a wall between two people. It is a structure that makes the relationship possible. Because without the ability to be honest about what you will and will not accept, what remains in the relationship is a performance, a version of you that has been adjusted to accommodate whatever the other person needs. And the person you are in relationship with, even if they pushed for that accommodation, cannot fully trust it, because they can feel, beneath the surface, that they are not meeting the real you. They are meeting the version of you that did not hold. When you hold a limit with consistency and with calm, without aggression and without apology, something different happens. The person testing it encounters something they did not expect: stability, a self that does not rearrange itself under pressure. And for the person whose boundary testing came from attachment anxiety, that stability is often exactly what their nervous system was looking for all along. Not permission to push further, evidence that there is something solid here, something real, something that will still be standing tomorrow. If you are someone who has spent years feeling like your limits are never honored, I want you to hear something clearly. The problem is rarely that your limits are too demanding. The problem is almost always that somewhere in the holding of them, the discomfort of the other person's reaction has become louder than your own signal. And the work is not about becoming harder or colder. It is about becoming more willing to tolerate the discomfort of staying true to what is actually true for you. That is not cruelty. That is the most honest thing you can offer another person, a self that is real, with limits that reflect that reality, and a relationship that is built on knowing who you actually are. If this landed for you, I want to hear about it. Have you been on either side of this? The one whose limits were tested, or the one doing the testing without fully understanding why? Leave that below. I read every single one, and if someone in your life has pushed your limits in a way you could not quite make sense of before today, share this with them. This is Emotions and Decisions. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.